Gandhi had a very important role in mass mobilization, no doubt. But we got our independence primarily because the last of the revolutionaries was the Azad Hind Fauj, led by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I say we got our cultural freedom on the 1st of November 1858. We got our political freedom on the 19th of February 1946. And we got our economic freedom in July 1991.
Of course, there should be privatization. Maybe sometimes in some sectors, there shouldn't be complete privatization.
Indigo has become too big.
Yes.
It has 65% market share,
yeah.
and we basically have suddenly become a duopoly, almost.
Yeah.
Because we have just two carriers who have 91% market share. So, our bureaucracy was established during British rule, and it was a bureaucracy of control,
Yes.
not a bureaucracy of development. So, if you go to a DM's office, it's like a Maharaja, Maharani sitting there.
Definitely.
So, Maharaja, Maharani until the Chief Minister arrives.
Yeah.
When the Chief Minister arrives, then she is the Maima.
Yeah.
It is ironic that in India, we have companies going for labor-saving innovations rather than employing labor. The reason for this is through most of human history, we have been the clothiers to the world. It's time to become again.
Prasenjit sir, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Really looking forward to our conversation about India's economic journey, where we currently are, our culture, how these all are correlated. So first of all, thank you so much for accepting my invite to be on the podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah. First of all, I want to ask you, Abhi, we were discussing before the podcast that you were away from India for 33 years, if I'm not wrong.
That's right.
And you were in Singapore and Malaysia, and then 5 years back you decided to come back. Firstly, I want to ask you, what made you come back to our country? I want to start off with that.
Well, I always wanted to come back. When I went to study abroad, I thought I'll be going to study for a few years, maybe work for a few years, and then come back. I specialized in Asia, so I dreamt of actually working in India for most of my career. But it turned out that most work on Asia was occurring in Singapore and Hong Kong. And so I spent most of my career in Singapore, 25 years. 3 or 4 months in Hong Kong out of that, and about 4 years working in Malaysia out of those 25 years. Before that, I was in the US for 7 or 8 years, studying and working. So I always wanted to come back to India.
Yeah.
This is my nation. When I met friends in Singapore who were from the UK, Ireland, America, Sweden, they all obviously eventually would go back to their country. So it's natural. You work somewhere else, but ultimately you come home. And that is essentially what I've done.
Okay. It's very interesting that even in your book, India Reborn, you have correlated how our economic journey is also associated with our history and our culture. Can you just explain that a little bit of how these two are actually related?
Well, it is absolutely related because if you look at other countries, for instance, I look at Japan as a great example of a nation that was never colonized by anybody. And they are confident in their skin. They're confident in their own culture. Whereas we have gone through 190 years of British colonial rule. Prior to that, we had several centuries, especially in the north and east of India, of rule by Persians and Turks and so on. So our culture was subdued.
Yeah.
But it was never defeated. I think the point of my book really is that unlike many other civilizations, if you think about the Persian civilization, for instance, the Persians had defeated the ancient Greeks. They were one of the great civilizations of the ancient world. But they ceased to exist.
Yes.
In fact, the Persian civilization only exists now in India.
In India, yes.
There are a few isolated people left in Persia itself, but the ancient Persian civilization, based on Zoroastrianism, exists only in India.
Who we call the Parsis.
Who we call the Parsis, of course. So, many others, ancient Egypt, we think of ancient Egypt, Antony and Cleopatra, of Shakespeare's time. Cleopatra was not really Egyptian. She was a Macedonian descendant.
Oh.
So already by then, the Greeks had subdued, or the Macedonians had subdued Alexander, had subdued the Egyptians. And over time, Egypt today is an Arab culture.
Yes.
Although it was ancient Egypt was totally autonomous and completely separate from the Arabs. Today they speak Arabic. So that whole civilization is gone. But we survived. And my book addresses, in the beginning, the first part of the book addresses why it is that we survived. We survived because there was strength and resilience in our culture and our civilization. There was also an ability to resist. So, we don't know some of our heroes. Now, my book is not about those heroes. I might need to write another one. But the point is that between the time of Muhammad bin Qasim taking Sindh, and before that Balochistan, and the time of Mahmud of Ghazni, there's a 300-year period during which there was resistance by the Indians.
Yes.
And not just resistance, but they defeated the conquerors and went all the way to Arabia, Bappa Rawal. So there are these stories that are lost. But the point is that we survived while so many other civilizations did not.
Yeah.
And what I show is that our civilization survived during periods of foreign rule because there were redoubts. When Babur arrived in India, 1526, the first battle of Panipat, he never dared go down south because in the south ruled Krishnadeva Raya of Vijayanagar. And Vijayanagar was visited by Domingo Paes and other Portuguese, Barbosa and others. And what they noted was that Vijayanagar was by far the most prosperous city in the world. In fact, I was recently, in France, and I saw some of the palaces that were built around the same time. They were really grand. Now, unfortunately, Vijayanagar no longer exists because in 1556, Krishnadeva Raya's descendant was defeated at the Battle of Talikota. But the point is that Vijayanagar was a tremendous civilizational entity, and within less than 100 years of Vijayanagar's defeat, emerged Shivaji and the Marathas, and later emerged Maharaja Ranjit Singh in Punjab. In fact, all of what is today Pakistan was actually united by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. What is today Pakistan plus Jammu and Kashmir and Indian Punjab, Haryana and Delhi was his kingdom.
Yeah.
So the point is that we were able to survive, whereas all the other great civilizations, apart from the Chinese, the Chinese also were defeated by foreigners. The interesting thing is that China was ruled, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was being ruled by the Manchus, who were a completely non-Chinese people. They were a Turkic-speaking people, but they were Turkic-speaking Buddhists who had a link to Tibet because of their Buddhism. And similar was the only other Chinese dynasty that ever had any links to Tibet were the Mongols. So Genghis Khan's grandson was the emperor of China, Kublai Khan. He founded the Mongol dynasty, which is called Yuan in China. And both the Mongols and the Manchus were looked upon as foreign devils by the Chinese. And they ruled as foreign dynasties. They took on many of the accoutrements of Chinese-ness, but they were clearly foreign. And they made sure that the Han Chinese knew that they were a subject people, perhaps even a slave people.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea about this. Okay.
So the point is that we survived, and the Chinese too survived in the end. But the point is, we survived because we had resilience in our culture, A, and B, we were able to fight back. We were never fully defeated. I think the point is, so even at the greatest apogee of Turkic or Mongol or Mughal Timurid rule, there were parts of India that were not defeated. There was Assam, Manipur, Tripura, Nepal, and of course there was Burma. So those were all areas where Indians who found it impossible to live in this stifling environment, Hindus, Buddhists, they could take refuge in these redoubts. And even during British rule, 1/3 of India's land and 1/4 of India's people were outside British India.
Yes.
And the interesting point is that there, Indian culture survived fully. The other point I make in the book is that in 1857-58, I call it the first war of Indian independence, and there was a positive outcome from that war. We got our cultural freedom at the end of that war. That war, there was something called the Azamgarh Declaration or Proclamation made towards the end of August 1857, which all Indians should be aware of. It was made by a grandson of Bahadur Shah in collaboration with Nana Sahib, who was the Peshwa, anointed Peshwa of the Marathas. Now, Peshwa is an interesting word. Peshwa is a Persian word. The Maratha word or the Sanskrit word that Shivaji wanted to use was Pant Pradhan. So let's say the Pant Pradhan, or so-called Peshwa of the Marathas, was Nana Sahib. He was the son of the last Peshwa, Bajirao II, who was a useless fellow. Unfortunately, Bajirao II was no good. Bajirao I was a tremendous warrior. He fought 38 battles and never lost one. And in fact, he is the one who expanded the Maratha domains far more than anybody else. He was a tremendous warrior. Unfortunately, he died very young. Both Bajirao I as well as his father Balaji Vishwanath died at about 40. So, and then there's his son. The next Peshwa also died at around 40. Unfortunately, their life expectancy was rather low. But the point is that they were tremendous individuals. I'd say Bajirao particularly so. And the second Bajirao was actually the son of Raghunath Rao, who was called Raghoba. He was a disenchanted second son of a previous Peshwa, who became an ally of the British. He was on the payroll of the British, and when his son became Bajirao II, because the previous Peshwa had committed suicide, the British had their opportunity. But the point is that although the Marathas lost the Third Anglo-Maratha War, and they had ruled India for 100 years by then already, most of India had been ruled by the Marathas for more than 100 years. When they lost the Third Anglo-Maratha War, only the Peshwa was defeated. The Holkars, the Gwalior, the Scindias of Gwalior, the Holkars of Indore, remained independent. And their independence became a factor in 1857-58 as well, particularly Gwalior. So it is, the interesting thing is our culture was preserved. And at the end of 1858, and on the 1st of November 1858, Queen Victoria made a proclamation to try and end the war quickly, because Tatya Tope, commander-in-chief of Nana Sahib's forces, had crossed the Narmada the previous day. On the 31st of October 1858, he crossed the Narmada and he was about to enter the Maratha heartlands. So if he entered the Maratha heartlands, if he reached Nagpur and Satara and so on, he would be able to arouse the Maratha heartland, and the Bombay army, the British Bombay army, would have joined the war on his side. Had that happened, the British probably would have fallen, because they had already called in 75,000 troops from all over the world to try and fight back against the Indians. Now, we think that, it all ended on 20th September 1857 with the fall of Delhi. But the fall of Delhi was only one episode
Of that whole
of
rebellion.
that. It went on. Now, so one of the other themes of my book is that ahimsa had a role in mass mobilization. Gandhi had a very important role in mass mobilization, no doubt. But we got our independence primarily because of the revolutionaries.
Yeah, definitely.
And we start with the revolutionaries of 1857-58. So we must remember them. I tell the full story of 1857-58 in the book, and it's a remarkable story.
Yeah.
It's a really exciting story that we need to know more about. Unfortunately, most history has been written by the British and their acolytes.
Yes, yes.
So we need to change the narrative by simply telling the truth. And we can start with Savarkar's book.
Yeah.
Savarkar's book on 1857, she wrote at the age of 24. It was banned before publication. It was supposed to come out on the 50th anniversary of the start of the war. It came out on the 52nd anniversary after being banned. But it was published, it is interestingly, the original manuscript in Marathi was smuggled into India.
Yes, I know.
By Sikandar Hayat Khan.
Yes.
Sikandar Hayat Khan later became the chief minister, premier of Punjab, undivided Punjab. Anyway, so it was smuggled in and it was spread. Now the point is, it was then banned by the British. It was only unbanned in 1946 and not really properly. Even now, the edition that I read is full of typos. So somebody needs to relook at it, just do a clean edit and publish that book. That is one book. Another book about 1857 that is remarkable is by Tatya Tope's descendant, Parag Tope, has written a wonderful book called Operation Red Lotus. So these two books I have synthesized and come up with the chapter on 1857 in my book, where you see that it was because of Tatya Tope that the proclamation was made by Queen Victoria. And the key aspect of the proclamation was that she promised not to ever again interfere in the religions of India.
Okay.
So I say we got our cultural freedom on the 1st of November, 1858.
1858, okay.
So we got it in 1858. We got our political freedom on the 19th of February, 1946. And we got our economic freedom in July 1991.
Oh, okay.
So these are the three freedoms.
Okay. Three major movements that impacted.
Yes. And now 1946, I said 19th February 1946, not 15th August 1947. So why is that? You see, what happened was that the last of the revolutionaries was the Azad Hind Fauj, led by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose.
Yes.
And Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he had said, when he arrived in Singapore, first he took a huge submarine journey from Kiel in Germany down to the Cape of Good Hope, and then off Madagascar he switched to another submarine, a Japanese one, and arrived in Sumatra, in Indonesia, and then flew to Tokyo. And then when he arrived in Singapore in July 1943, he gave 2 or 3 speeches. One of them, he said, the key point was that, look, we are going to form a freedom army which will fight for our freedom. It will not be big enough to take on an army of 1 million that the British have assembled. But when the army of occupation that the British have, when they see that their compatriots are capable of fighting for freedom, they too will rise up in rebellion. And once they rise, the British will not be able to hold on to India anymore.
Yes.
Interestingly, when the war actually happened, you see, in 1944, the INA was fighting. On the first few days, 100 British Indian troops defected to the Netaji's side. At least 100. But many were then shot. Those who were trying to defect were shot from behind. And so that ended that. But the point is that there was a rebellion.
Yes.
The rebellion started after the INA trials. See, the INA trials started on the 5th of November 1945. And within 2 weeks of the INA trials, the governor of NWFP, the British governor of NWFP, said, please stop the trials because we are going to lose NWFP. 2 days later, the governor of Punjab said, we have lost Punjab. If you continue the trials, we have lost. What has happened? There is an upsurge of national sentiment in favor of the INA. And as a result, you see now, on the 3rd of January 1946, the court-martial was to have ended and the verdict was supposed to be given. Everybody thought that, of course, these 3 officers, Shah Nawaz, Dhillon and Prem Saigal, are going to be sentenced to death for high treason. But not only were they not sentenced to death, they were given a so-called transportation for life sentence, but even that was commuted. So they were actually acquitted on 3rd January 1946. Why? Because the Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army, Auchinleck, had figured that if they were to be executed, there would be a massive mutiny which would be impossible to control. So he acquitted them. And he wrote a letter to the senior officers of his army saying why he's doing it. And he said that I need to acquit them because if I don't, the Indian troops will revolt. And I've even spoken to the senior officers that we have, the Indian officers, and I've asked them. Most of them say things like, sir, don't ask an impossible question. So he acquitted them in the hope that there would be no mutiny among the Indian armed forces. But there was. Within 2 weeks, the Royal Indian Air Force began to mutiny. 5,000 RAF and RIAF members mutinied. And starting on the 8th of February 1946, there was a massive mutiny in the Royal Indian Navy. And by the 18th of February, 88 out of the 98 ships of the Royal Indian Navy had joined the mutiny. And those ships were rebadged Indian National Naval Ship instead of Royal Indian or His Majesty's or His Majesty's Indian Ship, HMIS. They were all rebadged INNS, Indian National Naval Ship. So they were doing it in Netaji's name. And the rebellion was so widespread that it spread to every single port establishment. All the ports had joined the rebellion. That was the end of the British Empire. So around this time, Wavell asked Attlee for three British battalions. He said, we need British battalions to come and subdue this massive rebellion that is happening. And Attlee said, I don't have a single person to send. Forget about 3 battalions. There's no question of sending battalions. You see, now, you go back to the First World War. After the First World War, the British took Turkey. The Ottoman Empire was taken. Istanbul was taken over and made a British colony for a while. Because they had lots of troops. And those troops were mainly Indian troops, by the way. Now, who are they going to use? At this time, in 1946, they were trying to retake Indonesia and give it to the Dutch using Indian troops. Indian troops in November 1945 were fighting the so-called Battle of Surabaya in Indonesia. In February 1946, the Indian troops in Vietnam were trying to restore French rule over Vietnam. But there were British Indian troops being used.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do in India? If the Indian troops rise up, then there's nothing to be done. And there are no British troops left that you can send across. And so instead, Attlee, on the 19th of February 1946, announced that he is going to send his 3 senior-most cabinet colleagues to negotiate India's independence. Until that point, the British had never even considered independence for India. People say the Labour Party manifesto of 1945 had already promised India independence. This is nonsense. all you have to do is look at the Labour Party manifesto. It is there. It's the public domain. There's 1/5 of one long sentence which says, and we shall also advance India towards self-rule. This is the same language, exactly the same language, used by the Secretary of State for India, Edwin Montagu, on the 20th of August, 1917. Same language. So what did we get after the First World War? We got the Rowlatt Act, because the Gaddarites had put the fear of God into the British, had shaken the foundations of the British Empire during the First World War. So they came up with the Rowlatt Act to control the Gaddarites. And but they had promised, the Secretary of State for India had promised self-rule. We thought it meant dominion status. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. That's all that the Labour Party was promising. Advancing India towards
self-governance, self-rule.
Now, and that was 1/5 of one sentence. In India, the mythology has been built up that Labour Party, once the Labour Party was elected, India was assured independence. This is nonsense. The only reason that India got independence was because the revolutionaries forced it, including the sailors of the Royal Indian Navy. And not just that, the Madras Regiment of the Army and the Jabalpur Regiment of the Army also had mutinied. So there was Air Force, Navy and Army mutiny occurring, and it would have spread. It was impossible for the British to hold on to India. And that is when... So that is why I say 19th February 1946 is the day we should celebrate. When the Philippines got independence, for the first 30 years or so, they used to celebrate 4th of July as their Independence Day. Same as the American one. Then they realized, hey, what is this? So now they celebrate, I think, on the 14th of June. So similarly, India, we celebrate 15th of August. You know why? Because that was the day, 2 years earlier, that Japan had surrendered. Japan had surrendered on 15th of August 1945.
Okay.
And so Mountbatten chose 15th of August because it was a day that the British wanted to celebrate their own so-called victory. There was no victory for them, by the way. The victory was won by American nuclear bombs falling on Japan. But the point is that is basically why he chose that day.
Yeah, the same colonial mindset.
So I think even in our choice of Independence Day, we are subject to coloniality.
Yeah, I get it now. Two things before I move on to the economic part of it. For the viewers, you spoke about Bappa Rawal. One very interesting fact is that Rawalpindi is actually named after Bappa Rawal. Not many people know about it. And secondly, you spoke about the revolutionaries. Again, for the viewers, there is a book by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal called The Revolutionaries, The Other Side of India's Freedom Struggle, which talks about all of these people, Sachindranath Sanyal and Savarkar, Azad Hind, what was that called? India House.
India House
in the UK.
Absolutely. I quote Sanjeev's book quite extensively.
Okay.
But apart from that, there is also, some of the stories go beyond. The British partitioned Bengal as an act of divide and rule. But the partition of Bengal was rescinded at the end of 1911 and early 1912. It was rescinded and there was a new united Bengal created. But why did this happen? This happened because people like Bagha Jotin Mukherjee. Now, Bagha Jotin is now forgotten in most of India, not in Bengal. But in the rest of the country, he's more or less forgotten.
I'm also hearing his name for the first time.
You're hearing?
Yeah.
So his name is Bagha Jotin. He was the successor to Sri Aurobindo. See, Aurobindo Ghosh was the leader of the revolutionaries. After 1907. In 1907, the Surat Congress saw a split between what I call the nationalists. In fact, the literature of the time called them nationalists, and the others were called loyalists.
Okay.
In our history, the nationalists are now called extremists, and the British loyalists are called moderates. The moderates were led by a man called G.K. Gokhale, whose protégés, by the way, were M.A. Jinnah and M.K. Gandhi. So they were the nationalists were Bal Pal Lal.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lokmanya Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Lala Lajpat Rai, plus Aurobindo Ghosh. Now, Aurobindo is forgotten because he became a monk. Now, he became a sannyasi primarily because he had a vision when he was in jail. But the interesting thing was, at his trial, he was also supposed to be executed. But at his trial, the judge turned out to be a person called Beechcroft, who was his junior in Cambridge. And Aurobindo Ghosh had come first. He was the most brilliant student at both school and college. He was head boy of England's best schools. St. Paul's School, London, he was the head boy. Imagine a black boy from Bengal becoming head boy of
most prestigious
the most prestigious school in London. Anyway, so he became head boy, and then he went to Cambridge and did the classics tripos, Latin and Greek, and he was the topper. So the judge was so overawed when he saw this great man in front of him that he acquitted him. So that acquittal, followed by the visions that he saw, Sri Aurobindo said he saw Swami Vivekananda come to him and tell him that his role now is to focus more on spirituality and lifting up the spiritual basis of India. So he moved away. But he was the fourth, Bal Pal Lal and Aurobindo Ghosh. Now,
very interesting.
And in fact, perhaps he was the leader. He was the intellectual leader for sure. Now, after 1907, after the Surat Congress saw a split, the nationalists became revolutionaries. And Tilak soon after that was sent off to Mandalay. Both actually Lala Lajpat Rai as well, and Ajit Singh, the uncle of Bhagat Singh. He was also sent to Mandalay, but they were sent back. Lala Lajpat Rai and Ajit Singh were sent back after a short while because they thought that Punjab would rise up. And so they. But Lokmanya Tilak spent 6 years in a Mandalay jail, away from India, in what is now Myanmar. And of course, Aurobindo, the Alipur trial happened. His brother was sent to, Barin Ghosh was sent off to cellular jail, what is called, the Kalapani. And almost all his supporters were either executed or sent to Kalapani. But the interesting thing is that while this was going on, once he had become a sannyasi, his successor as leader of the revolutionaries was Bagajotin, Jatin Mukherjee. And Bagajotin, in 1911, he had suborned the Jat regiment that was based in Fort William in Calcutta, the capital of the British Empire. And they had risen, they were ready to rise in rebellion. The British managed to infiltrate that and find out about it. They executed the leadership of that regiment that was about to revolt and hushed it up. They hushed it up because they said, we don't want to create another Aurobindo. We don't want to have another Aurobindo in this Jatin fellow. So hush it up. So it was hushed up. And later, of course, in 1915, Jatin was killed in an encounter. But he was one of the key leaders of the Gadar movement. And he was about to receive a huge shipment of arms. By the shipment of the arms was being sent by the brother of Germany's finance minister, and he was based in Jakarta, in what is today Indonesia, which the Germans had captured the Netherlands, and so Jakarta was available to them, and the shipment was coming in off the coast of Orissa. But unfortunately, news about this reached the Allies through a Czech nationalist who later became a minister in Czechoslovakia. This Czech nationalist, he found out about this, told the British. He was working in in an Austrian library, and he found out about this, and he informed the British. And so Bagajuddin was shot in an encounter, the massive. He fought to the death, just like Chandrasekhar Azad and many others. So these were, but the point is that they did not fight in vain. This was 1915. By 1911, the fact that he had managed to infiltrate the Jat regiment and get them to rebel meant that the British were frightened. Not just that, many of the collaborators of the British were being shot just in the streets around the Governor General's mansion, or Viceroy's mansion in Calcutta. So as a result, the British felt that they were being cornered by the revolutionaries, and so they may as well make a concession.
Okay.
So just as they made a concession in 1858, cultural freedom, 1911, at the end of 1911, they made a concession because the revolutionaries had forced them. With Gandhiji, all his movements, unfortunately, resulted in no concessions from the British, except perhaps the first. The first might have, the so-called non-cooperation and Khilafat movement of 1920-21. At the end of 21, Gandhiji had said, I'm going to give you dominion status by the end of 1921. He had promised it. And that is how he convinced Congress to vote for Khilafat and non-cooperation. But at the end of 1921, it seemed he was not going to be able to deliver on his promise. But interestingly, Governor General, the Viceroy, Reading, proposed a roundtable conference in the middle of January 1922. So that was the only time the British came close to conceding to Gandhiji. If you look at his subsequent movement, the Salt Satyagraha, it resulted in the Gandhi-Irwin Pact following year. Gandhi-Irwin Pact basically did not result to much because it then resulted in Gandhiji participating in the second roundtable conference, which was a complete failure. Third roundtable conference then happened without him. And the Government of India Act of 1935 was the result. I'd say 1935 Government of India Act gave India less freedom than Hong Kong was getting in 1996-97 from the British. So it was a failure. And similarly, Quit India. Quit India was crushed within 6 months. 8th August 1942, by January, February 1943, it had been crushed. And it was then the INA that actually continued the movement and that basically had the British on the run. And eventually
we got our freedom.
Our political freedom on 19th of February 1946.
Yes. And then you talk about our economic freedom, which you say started from 1991 or 1990. What do you think changed in India after that? Because we are taught in school कि there was liberalization, privatization, globalization. School में हमें उतने 2 chapter पढ़ा के छोड़ देते हैं, उसके आगे की depth में नहीं जाते.
हाँ.
What do you think? And you were in the country at that time?
I had just left.
You had just left.
Left 4 years earlier.
Yeah. So,
but interestingly, in 1991, in 1990, I had started working at a place called Wharton Econometrics in Philadelphia, and I gave a talk. When I was interviewed for the job, my last stage of the job process was to make a presentation on what India needed to do if it was to get out of its low growth trap.
Yeah.
So this was in late 1990. And I laid out a long list of things that India needed to do. I mean, this was the dream, this was the so-called dream list for Indian economists at that time. All that India needs to do to overcome its
low growth
trap. And everything that I was, that entire presentation turned out to have been implemented, except one thing, except privatization. Everything else was there. Now, you see, what India had before that was an extreme form of licensing.
Yeah, the license Raj.
For every, you could not start a new industry without a license.
Yeah.
You could not expand without a license. You could not change your product mix without a license.
Yes.
Okay, this was the extreme licensing. For consumer goods, the import of all consumer goods was banned. You could not, zero. I mean, there was no tariff. There was a total ban on consumer goods imports. And on most other things, the tariffs were
Extremely
prohibitively high. And so we had shoddy consumer goods. And, for instance, one of my clients at Wharton Econometrics, soon after the economy opened, was General Motors, the
GM,
GM. And GM said, I gave them a thing about the, they wanted to know about the automobile industry in India, of course. So I gave them all the data and all that. They were shocked. At that time, India's annual production of cars was about 130,000. 130,000 cars. And they went to visit Hindustan Motors. They came back laughing. They said, I mean, this is a 1950s factory. I said, yes, it is. Yeah. 40. so
that is also because there was no competition. So
there was no competition.
Yeah.
So you could.
You were happy कि जैसा चल रहा है चलने दो.
And we used to be so proud. I don't know if you remember this, but Indians, ambassador, Ambi, kitna acha hai. This was the story.
Yeah.
Now, I still remember. I'll never forget the third gear of the ambassador. ऐसा करके, it was always will be a dang big noise.
Yeah.
Achha, anyway, now the point is, it was an ancient car, and that was the norm. Pretty much everywhere we had consumer goods that were shoddy and subject to almost no competition, either from imports or from any domestic players, because there were only 2 or 3 in every sector.
Yes.
Now, so all this was changed dramatically in July 1991. And I attribute that, of course, to this remarkable man, P.V. Narasimha Rao.
Yes.
P.V. Narasimha Rao was, he had many flaws. I mean, he
Everyone does.
He was part of the Congress ecosystem. He did some shady things with VP Singh and so on. So, but the point is that cometh the hour, here was the man. And he delivered. Now, the interesting thing was that, of course, Manmohan Singh gets a lot of the credit. Because
he was the finance
minister. Yeah. But the industry minister was Narasimha Rao himself. Okay. He had a minister of state called Kurian who actually made the announcement. But the industry minister was Narasimha Rao himself. The most dramatic reforms were the dismantling of industrial licensing. That was done purely by Narasimha Rao himself. And he had A.N. Verma as cabinet secretary. He had been formerly industry secretary. So there were a lot of people involved. But the point is that the IMF had basically said, you better do something dramatic or we
can't help you.
We're not going to be able to help you at all. Yeah. They had given us a loan at the beginning of that year, $630 million, small amount. And that was the end. Once that ran out, they said, well, that's it.
You have to open up.
So they opened up. They dramatically shifted. They reduced import tariffs drastically, dismantled the system of bans on consumer goods imports, etc. And of course, over the next 3 years, they also liberalized the way the rupee was managed and made it a managed float. So all of that happened. And it was the political savvy of Narasimha Rao that made it happen. Manmohan Singh was back to the hilt, and that is what the
economic freedom.
The economic freedom came through that. Now, that was not the end of the story because there were other aspects. Now, if you think about, when I look at Japan and Southeast Asia, what enabled them to succeed economically also was the fact that they had land reform at the beginning. So they had land reform which made agriculture extremely productive. To some degree, we had that because of Lal Bahadur Shastri's reforms of 1965. 1965, he completely altered the Nehruvian approach to the agriculture sector,
Yes.
and the Green Revolution began. So the Green Revolution was not a complete revolution, but it certainly unleashed a lot of the productive potential
Definitely.
in agriculture. For that, we owe Lal Bahadur Shastri a big thank you. And now, the other important aspect was that in East Asia, almost every country east of us, literacy was a big focus at the beginning. And they ensured that universal literacy was achieved quite early. Japan was one of the first countries outside Scandinavia to have universal literacy. And the Japanese colonies, the likes of Taiwan and Korea, also had very high levels of literacy. Whereas we, at independence, our literacy rate was 14%. And in 1950, it had gone to 18%. But the point is, at independence, 14%, only 1/7 of all India's people could read and write. By 1991, that had only risen to 52%. So more than half our people were
Still not able to read and write.
in any language. That is a disadvantage
With such a huge population,
Yeah.
especially.
So, interestingly, again, I point this out that in Travancore and Cochin in Kerala, they had, the kings of Travancore and Cochin had introduced universal literacy in 1905. The king of Baroda, Sahajirao Gaikwad, had introduced universal literacy in 1905. So there had been, while some kings, Indore, the Holkars had also. So the kings of these small principalities
Did have this vision.
had that vision. But unfortunately, that didn't extend to the country. And it was not until 2001 that, the
Universal-
Sarva Shiksha
Yeah.
Abhiyan of Vajpayee ji
Yeah.
introduced compulsory
Education.
primary education for all Indian kids. Now, as a result, I think we are now well positioned because we now have all cohorts of people coming into the workforce now, at least are literate. They may not be able to read and write in English and so on and so forth that well.
at least they are literate,
But they are
yeah.
literate in some language, they are numerate, and therefore they have the basics to participate in a modern economy.
So I want to ask you one thing. 1991 we opened up to the world, but I always wonder about this is when was actually the correct time? Was it from the beginning? Was it somewhere in the 70s? Was it somewhere in the 80s where we should have opened
Well,
up?
I think we should have. What a lot of countries started doing was around 1960, Korea and Taiwan. So in South Korea, in 1961 is when they started. In Taiwan, you could say around 1958 to 60 is when they altered their incentive structure to become export promoting and export oriented. Singapore became independent of Malaysia in 1965, and right from the start, it was export oriented. So these are examples of countries that in the 1960s turned towards an export orientation. But they were really following the example set by Japan. Japan turned in that direction right from the start. In 1950, 1951, once they signed peace treaties with everybody that had fought them in the Second World War, from that point on, they became export-oriented. And export orientation meant that they began with labor-intensive manufacturing. We don't think about Japan as a producer of textiles and garments. But you see, after the Second World War, there were 12 million people in Japan who were out of work. They had come back from the Japanese colonies. They were soldiers, etc.
It was the need of the hour.
So the need of the hour was labor-intensive manufacturing. You couldn't have 12 million extra people in agriculture because they would depress average productivity in agriculture. So you needed to try and attract them into labor-intensive manufacturing so that you'd create employment, create a labor force that was, and of course, already had literacy, right? I mean,
Yeah,
literacy
that is a
was
very,
50,
very
60-year-old point.
That's a very important part of whatever we are discussing.
So Japan started in 1950. South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore in the 1960s. Had we taken that path in 1961 or 1965, then we would have also achieved much faster growth. We chose not to do it. Now, interestingly, Manmohan Singh was writing his PhD around this time.
Oh, okay.
And his PhD actually advocated an export-oriented path. But once he joined the government, he became, he just went along with whatever he was ordered
I think
to
that
do.
happens with a lot of people that come with a big dream to join politics.
He didn't join politics. He joined the government. He joined the
Yeah,
bureaucracy.
Yeah, bureaucracy. But still, I'm sure people come with a lot of ideas and then you have to bow down to a lot of people in this system. One more thing. You said that the fourth point you were discussing that should have happened early on was privatization
Yeah.
well. I have a very interesting question over here. Of course, there should be privatization of a lot of things, but then I see something like what happened 10 days ago in our country is when I realized maybe sometimes in some sectors which are very, very important, there shouldn't be complete privatization is when what happened with Indigo. Now, that is the day I realized that, and this is with all the big countries, that every big country has their own national carrier. Now, even I thought that when Air India gets privatized, things are going to get better. And of course, it's with the Tatas, I'm sure, few years down the line, it is going to grow and get better. But don't you think that such an important part, which is literally travel in a country like India, which is so big, where you need a very big airlines for the country to operate, we should have a national carrier which should be nationalized rather than privatized, because we saw the debacle that happened with Indigo.
Look, the debacle at Indigo cannot be blamed on the fact that we don't have a national carrier. Because the national carrier, had the national carrier been government owned, it would have probably been in even worse shape.
Yes,
It was constantly in need of capital infusion by the government. So part of the reason why we had this problem a few days ago with Indigo is that Indigo has become too big.
Yes.
It has 65% market share. And we basically have suddenly become a duopoly, almost.
Yeah.
Because we have just two carriers who have 91% market share. So this is a problem that has resulted from the fact that many of the other players fell by the wayside, became bankrupt. We had Jet Airways, excellent airline, terrific service. It fell by the wayside.
Kingfisher,
Sahara, SpiceJet still exists, but very small.
Yeah.
Akasa Air is just emerging. So I think the winner from this will probably be someone like Akasa Air and also perhaps Air India. But the point is that in any sector, if you have a duopoly, you have a problem. So in telecoms, we were in danger of having a duopoly.
Yeah.
There's just Airtel and Jio. I like the fact that the government has infused capital into a third player, Vodafone, and is building it up so that we break the duopoly and there is a third player to provide competition. It is always good to have competition. So, yes, the reason why Indigo has so much market power is because the others fell by the wayside. Indigo provided, initially I hated taking Indigo's flights because the quality of service is really bad. But now I must say the quality of service is excellent.
Yeah.
Had become excellent until this week, last week. Things had improved a lot because once you have so much market share in a big country like India, you begin to have scale economies, you have many advantages. But if you have too much market share, if you have too much market power, you misuse it. Unfortunately, the fact that they did not comply with the DGCA's norms that were announced in January 2024, they still had not complied is a consequence of too much market power. So, to come back to your question about privatization, privatization, is not some sort of panacea. I'm not saying that privatization is a panacea, but the privatizations that happened under Vajpayee were hugely beneficial. So if you look at, say, Hindustan Zinc, I'm a shareholder, so small shareholder, but the point is that when I talk to my clients, for instance, I once took a leading fund manager to the factory
of
Hindustan Zinc in Udaipur. I mean, they cannot stop singing its praises, because now Hindustan Zinc, when it was owned by the government, was a loss maker. It was nothing. Today, it is the biggest or second biggest zinc producer in the world, one of the biggest silver producers in the world. It is a huge success story. Balco was much smaller than Nalco in aluminium, but now it is almost the same size. So you see that
definitely
privatization has had a positive impact. Unfortunately, the current government is not so keen on privatization.
Yes.
I think they can do more. The only one that's been done is Air India, but the likes of IDBI, etc., I think need to be privatized. Now, of course, you must avoid having a duopoly or a monopoly situation. Too much market power needs to be avoided, no doubt. And there are ways to deal with that, manage that. But privatization, now the thing is that this government is focused on introducing more market-based incentives for the public sector companies. To some degree. So that is not privatization, but it is what I would say is more the Singapore way, or to some degree the China way, where in Singapore, large chunks, there are companies like Keppel, there's something called Singapore Technologies Group, which are all government-owned. And DBS, the biggest bank in Singapore, is majority government-owned. Singtel is majority government-owned. So, but they are government-owned, but subject to full market pressures and market-based incentives for their managers, etc. So if you have that, then you're almost operating like a private entity. You're competing against private players, and then many of the advantages of privatization accrue despite the fact that you haven't fully privatized. To some degree, this is what India could have done. So for instance, with LIC. Now, I think LIC is a botched privatization. It's not even a privatization. There was a listing of LIC done about 3 years ago. And, the market requires, SEBI requires that you have to have 15% free float. This is only about 3% free float, this company, LIC, now has 3%. So it's neither here nor there. So if you want to do a proper privatization, you must go the whole hog. Now, you see, even when Singtel in Singapore was privatized, they listed too little of it because the bureaucrat has an incentive to get the best price and look like a hero.
Yes.
So if you float only a small amount, you get a terrific price, but there's no secondary market because the price is very good because there's tremendous demand for a limited amount of stock and there's no secondary market. Instead, if they had done, say, 5% of LIC and then another 5% after 6 months and gone to 15% within a year and a half, the price would have been much lower. The government would have earned less from that listing, but there would be a good secondary market and LIC would be valued much closer to what a private insurance company is. The valuation of LIC is much lower. So, yes, now, if you look at the way privatization is done, then there are ways of managing the process that guard against an indigo type situation.
Understood. What is one policy you think Indian government has taken out or added in the last 10, 15, 20 years that is very underrated according to you? Do you have?
Yes, of course. I think the IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, is a huge positive step that is very underrated. The other one that I think has enormous potential is what was just announced a few weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, which is the new LabourCodes. So now this was passed by Parliament 5 years ago. There were two landmark reform initiatives passed by Parliament and signed by the then president, the previous president of India, Ramnath Kovind. He had signed it actually 5 years ago in 2020. But one of them had to be rescinded, repealed. The farm laws were repealed the following year, about a year later.
Yeah.
The labor laws have only now been notified. Interestingly, in the intervening 5 years, many state governments have already implemented many of the new labor codes. So the notification by the center is merely a formality, some people say. I don't think it's a formality, because now it is the law of the land. If a state government wants to not implement it, then it has to pass new legislation against it. So the point is that we now have a very liberalized labor market, which deals with many of the old problems that prevented our labor market from functioning normally. And in particular, if I point out that someone like, say, Bajaj Auto, right? Bajaj Auto's labor force has declined by 15% in the last 5 years, but its output has increased manyfold.
Yeah.
So it is ironic that in India, we have companies going for labor-saving innovations, or their new investments are aimed at saving labor rather than employing labor. The reason for this is the old labor laws. Our labor laws, some of the labor laws go back to the 1890s, some to the 1940s.
Yeah.
They needed to be changed and modernized. So what the new labor laws do is, first they provide protections to many parts of the labor market that were unprotected. Gig workers, people who bring out delivery boys and so on. They are now covered by the new labor laws. So it covers a much wider canvas. That's one. Second is that it liberalizes the way in which you can hire people. So you can hire now for a fixed term. So you hire for 3 years, you hire for 2 years. At the end of the 2 years or 3 years, if you need to expand, you hire more. But if the investment hasn't gone too well, then the employment ends.
Fine.
Employment ends. That's it. So that actually enables closure, and by enabling closure of firms and the ending of employment, it encourages people to be more aggressive with employment.
Yeah.
And so it has the potential to unleash the labor-intensive manufacturing. I pointed out Japan started in 1950. Korea, Taiwan, Singapore in the 1960s, they went for labor-intensive manufacturing for export. Through all of human history, going back to Megasthenes. When Megasthenes visited Chandragupta Maurya, 2,300 years ago, he noted that the cloth, the wonderful clothes that Indians wore, was something that Europe needed to benefit from. From then, Daniel Defoe, writing in 1708, he wrote that all our cloth, our curtains, our bed linen, our bed covers, they're all Indian stuff. 1708, long before India had actually even become a British colony, 1708. So during the 17th century, when the British came as traders, they began, not just the British, the Dutch, the Danes, they all were taking cloth from India and selling it to the rest of the world at a huge profit margin. That is the nature of trade.
Yes.
Right? They were selling it at huge profit margins in Europe, later even in Africa, because India was the clothier to the world through most of human history. From Megasthenes to Daniel Defoe, we were doing the same. And in fact, even, during the British Industrial Revolution, it wasn't, I say that the British Industrial Revolution was primarily a textile revolution. Steel was a subsequent thing, but they started with a textile revolution, textile and garments. And they import substituted Indian textiles and garments. How did they do it? By banning imports of Indian cloth. 50 years before the Industrial Revolution happened. So they banned. As late as 1812, there was still an 81% tariff on Indian cloth entering the UK.
My God.
So even 50 years after the Industrial Revolution had started, they still needed an 80% tariff. So Indian cloth, traditional Indian cloth, was still so competitive. But since 1947, in 1947, we were the 8th largest manufactured exporter in the world. And our share, I think, of manufactured exports globally was around 3%. That declined to 0.4% by 1980. So the point is that we did something drastically wrong to lose our historic edge as clothiers to the world. Through most of human history, we have been the clothiers to the world. It's time to become again the clothiers to the world. And the labor market reforms that were notified 2 weeks ago are precisely what is needed to get us back on that bandwagon.
So I will connect 2-3 points and then we're going to go to the end of this conversation.
Sure.
You spoke about, say, the IBC and the new labor laws, and the government's talking about Viksit Bharat 2047. And I am myself very bullish about this country and what all future there is for our country, politically, economically, socially. But there is something, जैसे आपने लाइसेंस राज की बात करी थी ना, ड्रकोनियन लॉ बोल लो उसको, क्या है? आई एम टॉकिंग एज अ businessman now. The biggest problem I see is, yes, we are getting very, very good laws in this country. And yes, the businesses are flourishing and the businesses are growing. But to reach the level of, say, someone that we compete with or even look up to, whether it's Japan or China or the countries just around us, the implementation is very, very important. And I think that is somewhere where we as a country are really lacking. And I'm not just talking about implementation on a higher level. I will start from the very bottom. If I need to set up, say, a manufacturing unit anywhere, in Rajasthan or Delhi, outside Delhi, NCR, anywhere, I'm sure that the government would be in full support. But the babus sitting near my factory really don't let me work. And 10 out of 10 businessmen are going to say the same thing.
Yes.
So how can we go towards a Viksit Bharat when the smallest of the issues which the common businessman faces are not being resolved?
Yes. So you see, now you have hit upon the nub of one of the problems I discuss in my book, which is that our bureaucracy was established during British rule. And it was a bureaucracy of control.
Yes.
Not a bureaucracy of development. So what happens is that these bureaucrats, they spend their first 20 years or so of their career heading the Mai-Baap government in the district where they are the Mai-Baap.
Yes.
So if you go to a DM's office, you sit in an audience, at least in Bengal, you sit in an audience, there are chairs, and he's like a Maharaja, Maharani sitting there.
Definitely.
So Maharaja, Maharani until the Chief Minister arrives. When the Chief Minister arrives, then she is the Mai-Baap. Okay. Now, the point is that this setup is ludicrous. This is, I think Prime Minister Modi has dealt with many other things very effectively, including the fact that, the elites of India used to call the poor people the great unwashed. The great unwashed. Because supposedly, you could tell by the clothes that they've not been washed, that they are from a different class. Now, this nonsense has been dealt with by the Prime Minister himself. So when he went to Ayodhya or to Varanasi to consecrate the
workers,
the new temple corridor, the Vishwanath temple corridor, he first gave respect to the workers for the work that they had done.
Yes.
This is new. He was denigrated as a chaiwala, right, by Mani Shankar Iyer, etc. Now the point is that he is proud. On the day that Prime Minister Modi was elected, I happened to arrive in Cambodia. I was going to Siem Reap to see that great Angkor Wat and other temples. And as I arrived, I was getting my luggage from
the
conveyor belt at Siem Reap Airport. And the Cambodian said, "Are you from India?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, you have elected a poor man as your Prime Minister." So it made an impact on the world. The fact that somebody, a self-made man, has risen to the top job in the nation and is changing the outlook, the way in which we deal with our fellow citizens, is a huge positive step. But I think, if you look at Gujarat, when Prime Minister Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat, he reformed the bureaucracy to a much greater degree than he has been able to do at the center. Because I think, unfortunately, at the center he has primarily looked to use the bureaucracy to run the country, which is the obvious way. But had he chosen to reform it completely, I think we might have benefited even more. And what I mean by that is that two things. First of all, if you look at our ministries, typically the person becomes a secretary in a ministry for the last 2 or 3 years of his or her career. They don't know anything about that ministry. They know a little bit. Maybe they've been joint secretary for 3 years, and maybe additional secretary for 2-3 years. But they have not developed domain expertise. So they've spent their career as a controller in the province, in the districts. Suddenly they are supposed to develop the country, to help deal with development issues. And the IAS will tell you that we are managers, we are generalists. But generalists can do certain things. What they cannot do is have the domain expertise to, for instance, negotiate a trade deal. So let us look at the trade deal with the United States. In July, you notice that Japan, Korea, Vietnam, all came to quick agreements with the United States, because they realized that you have to do a deal with the US, because this government is different from previous governments. So if you keep negotiating now, so we were the first country to start negotiating with the US. We started in February. The US admitted that India is the first one to start negotiating. We started in February, and as July came to an end, we were still hearing that we are negotiating a bilateral trade agreement that will be done around October. I said, October, the whole of the world, Japan, Korea, Britain, Vietnam, Indonesia, they're all doing deals before the 1st August deadline. We are looking at October, and it still hasn't been done. December has arrived. And when I was in Singapore, I looked at how our teams would come to negotiate. They were negotiating the Comprehensive Economic and Cooperation Agreement with Singapore at that time. And they were really quite unaware. I used to ask them simple things like, okay, you've come to negotiate with Singapore. Singapore is a free trade country.
Yeah.
It has no trade, no tariff barriers. So what have you come to negotiate? What are you going to gain from Singapore in order to open up the Indian economy to them? And they actually had no answer. This is as simple a question as this.
The most basic.
The most basic thing. I mean, and these are senior IAS officers who are, Commerce Secretary, etc. They've reached the pinnacle of their career. So it is, this is the problem, that there is not enough domain expertise. Those who have domain expertise are really quite low down in the pecking order.
And when you want to have a lateral entry, they say no.
Yes.
The politics starts happening.
Yeah, I mean, just 12 people they were trying to hire, and it proved to be an incredibly difficult thing.
Exactly.
So I think part of the problem, absolute part of the problem, is the IAS lobby and the civil service lobby, which is very powerful. Now, how much can one prime minister deal with?
Yeah, definitely.
The prime minister is dealing with many changes. He has done many significant, I'd say the labor market reforms almost revolutionary. The agricultural reforms were almost revolutionary. Remember, the 1991 reforms were done with the point of a gun at your head.
Yes.
The IMF was demanding it.
Yeah, definitely.
But for a government to do reform on its own, the IBC was introduced on its own. The labor market as well as the agricultural reforms were all done on their own. We now have, for new manufacturing units in India, we have an effective tax rate, corporate tax rate of 17%. That is competitive with everybody in East Asia. I would say that one other change that would be good is that we need to reduce personal income tax rates.
Yeah, definitely.
Reduce personal income tax rates as well in order to attract people back from places like the US. So, for instance, in areas like biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, electronics, we need to get the world's best to come. And many of them are Indians and have a place all over the world. Now that the US is making life very difficult for foreign technologists, scientists, etc., and not just the US, the latest cover story in The Economist talks about Europe. Every country in Europe, whether it's Germany, France.
They're all facing crisis of their own.
Are facing a crisis, and they're all seeking to restrict immigration.
Yeah.
And not just restrict immigration, to throw out some of those already there. So this is a huge opportunity for us to substantially reduce our personal income tax rates and attract those people. So, the best example I have is Morris Chang, who established a company called Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. He came back to Taiwan in 1987. Now, he didn't actually come back. He never lived in Taiwan. He was never Taiwanese. He was from mainland China. His parents had moved to the US. But when he didn't make it to CEO of Texas Instruments, Taiwan said, here's the opportunity. Here's a Taiwanese guy, a Chinese guy, but potentially Taiwanese. We can get him to create a world-class semiconductor company here. And that's essentially what they did. And 40 years later, TSMC is by far the largest. So
literally controlling so many things in the world.
We can do the same in areas like pharmaceuticals. We can do the same in even areas like steel and so on. I think it's great that Lakshmi Mittal is now finally back in India. I've been following his career since the beginning. I remember sitting in America, reading a little news item: Bethlehem Steel to be, some plant to be sold to Mittal. Late 1980s, early 90s. So things like this. Now, he has been, he invested first in Indonesia, East Germany, Trinidad,
all
Mexico, everywhere. But the last place was
Is
India.
India.
Finally, he's come back to India. So we need to be... Now, he has kept his Indian passport throughout. Like me, he has kept his Indian passport throughout. Wherever he has been in the world, he has remained an Indian. We need to be able to attract people like him. Not just him, but many others. You know, if you look at Vinod Dham, Vinod Dham was the man who came up with the Pentium chip, the microprocessor. That was the story of the 1990s, when the computer revolution was really taking off. Pentium chips were, the man who created the Pentium chip was an Indian called Vinod Dham. Vinod Dham started his career in Delhi, in a semiconductor company in Delhi. But that was in the early 1970s. He has spent his entire life. Now, Vinod Dham, the time to attract him back was 20 years ago. But there are others like that. Others
we still have
many
opportunity.
scientists and technologists that can be attracted back if you create a conducive environment for them to flourish. And of course, some of them flourish in things like DRDO and so on. But we need a much wider ecosystem, including a private ecosystem, where things like, finally, we are producing semiconductors in this country. We completely missed that. So we missed two parts. One is labor-intensive manufacturing. The other is electronics. But now electronics exports have done spectacularly in the last 6 years. And they are going to continue to be a big factor going forward. But now that we have semiconductors playing a role, we have a significant role in semiconductor design. We have, in pharmaceuticals, we are a big place for clinical trials. So there is an opportunity for India to attract the
best
talent. The best Indians from around the world need to be attracted back. When Japan went to the World Cup, they got a guy from Brazil called Alex. He was of Japanese descent, but he's called Alex. And, he didn't look that Japanese anymore, but he was of Japanese descent. And, they went to the World Cup with Alex. Now, we can do similar things, not in sport,
but in all industries.
We can do a Morris Chang. Basically, we need to be able to attract back the best of our talent around the world.
All right, I'm looking forward to a great future for the Indian economy, like how you are. I am too. I'm sure a lot of people watching this podcast would have learned a lot, and I hope what we just discussed it reaches the right people. I'm sure they also have their teams doing all this research, but it was a great conversation with you, and definitely I would tell everyone, I'll leave the link for your book as well. Everyone should go through it, read about the great revolutionaries and the three kind of movements, three freedoms that you discussed, and I think you have a lot of podcasts in you. So I'll be calling you back again very, very soon.
Thanks a lot,
and we'll have another discussion.
Great. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.